Hey guys, tonight we begin far below the surface, where silence is soaked into the stone and rivers whisper of worlds that came before. The stars haven't been born yet in this memory, and the soil still trembles with what it once held. You float above the ancient crust of the earth, but deeper still, deeper than time or even myth, there is a basin carved by something vast. You are hovering now over the shadow of a flood, and your breath matches the slow rhythm of the water, still hiding in forgotten valleys. This is no story of boats and animals, not yet. This is the ache before the deluge, the tension that gathers not in clouds, but in consequence. You probably won't survive this dimension of time, but you were never meant to. You're here to listen, to sink. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your location and what time you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You descend now, softly, into sediment. Not mud, not clay, but memory packed tight in layers, each one a song the earth once tried to forget. The Book of Genesis speaks of the great flood that covered the world, a reset wrapped in rainfall. It begins with grief, with God's sorrow, with a reckoning not driven by rage, but by a holy ache for what had been lost. And yet, this isn't just faith, not anymore. Geologists now speak of a time, not so long ago in human memory, when sea levels rose suddenly, when glaciers wept across continents, and the Black Sea swelled with startling speed. Some say the Mediterranean burst through a narrow strait and rushed in like judgment. Others believe the melting of the Ice Age birthed rivers where there had once been silence. You drift above one of those ancient beds now, watching as the land remembers. Sandstone once dry is now stained by the retreating tears of an old ocean. Beneath the Caspian, under the Aegean, inside deep-cut basins along Mesopotamia, there is flood memory in every continent. Not myth, not metaphor, but sediment and silence. And as you float, you feel it. Not the water, but the waiting. Some say Noah's Ark never landed on Ararat. Some say it didn't need to. That the Ark was not just wood, but wisdom. That it was the preservation of awe in a world too loud with its own pride. That it carried memory, not just flesh. In the Book of Enoch, yes, the one long left outside the standard scrolls, it said the angels wept before the flood, not because of the cleansing, but because of what humanity had already forgotten. The Nephilim, the Watchers, the union between spirit and flesh, it had all led to imbalance. And now, the sky wept, not in punishment, but in release. You pass over submerged valleys now, where cities once stood. Divers whisper of ruins beneath lake beds, of tools forged by hands we no longer name, of staircases that go nowhere but still lead somewhere sacred. And you ask, was it one flood or many? Some scholars debate this. Some say each region has its own flood story, Sumerian, Hindu, Norse, native, and they were all describing the same celestial sigh. Others say the flood is written into our DNA, that every people remember water because water remembers us. The rain didn't fall in terror, it fell in rhythm, like a lullaby sung too late. You're deeper now. The light above is dimming, but not from fear, from understanding. Because the flood wasn't just a disaster, it was a mirror. It showed us what happens when sacred things are left untended, when covenant becomes convenience, when the breath of heaven is forgotten in the noise of progress. And Noah, silent, faithful, weary Noah, did not argue with the rain. He built, he gathered, he floated, and some say he wept more than the sky did. You pause here in the stillness beneath what was once an ocean, and you realize the story is not about destruction. It's about remembrance. Somewhere in this deep place, science and spirit hold hands. Archaeologists uncover seabeds with sudden borders. Geologists whisper about abrupt transitions. And yet, Scripture already knew. It told us the world could cry. And so tonight, as you drift through this first event, this water-bound wonder, you begin to understand that truth does not compete with belief. It completes it. Let the waters settle now. Let the breath rise slow. Because above you, the rainbow has not yet formed. But already, the covenant is waiting. You drift now to the edge of memory where the skies still hold their breath and the rivers remember the time before they knew restraint. The earth beneath you feels softer here, as if humbled by waters that once rose not in anger, but in cleansing sorrow. The sky begins to darken, not with storm, but with longing. You float above the ancient valleys and broken ridgelines of what will later be called Mesopotamia, where whispers of a flood still sleep inside sediment. And below, buried beneath layers of silt and quiet stone, lie stories once spoken between the stars and the sea. You hear it before you see it, the slow, mournful groan of the heavens opening. Not a scream, a release, as if the firmament itself had grown weary of silence. And the windows of heaven were opened, says Genesis, like a curtain being gently pulled aside. And the rain remembered its name. Noah stands now beneath a sky that does not tremble, but exhales. Around him the ark's ribs creak like a second heartbeat, built from gopher wood and obedience. But it's not just the boat that holds life. It is the obedience itself that floats. Some say the flood was global. Others insist it was regional, a massive deluge along the Tigris and Euphrates. Geologists in the 20th century uncovered signs, sudden thick flood layers beneath ancient cities like Shurupak, telling of a catastrophic rise in waters. Not myth, but mud. Not story, but strata. You drift deeper into the memory of those waters. You feel the soil swell with loss and the mountains bow their heads beneath blankets of mist. The animals sleep two by two in the breath of hope, while Noah stands in silence, his eyes fixed not on the sky, but on the rhythm of the rain. The Book of Jubilees adds its own echo, saying angels wept as the waters rose, for judgment was never their joy, it was always their sorrow. One watcher, Barakel, is said to have knelt in grief, his tears blending with the rain that covered even the mountain tops. Some say the ark is still there, resting on Ararat or in shadowed ridges lost to time. Others believe it dissolved long ago into the dust of obedience, leaving only a silhouette in the soul of humanity, that to be saved, one must be still and build. You hover now above the ocean that was not always an ocean, and watch the waters fall, not in fury, but in rhythm. It was not rage that washed the world, it was a divine sigh, cleansing what had forgotten its name. And then, after days upon days, after nights that whispered of endings, the rain stopped. Stillness returned. The dove flew, and somewhere on a mountaintop, baptized by silence, hope began to dry. You drift now through a land where language once held no borders, where every voice carried the same sacred sound, and every word hummed with unity. This is Shinar, the wide plain between rivers, flat and open, like the mind of man before division, The wind here remembers what was spoken before it was scattered. You see them below, countless hands lifting clay, stacking stone, not out of rebellion but out of longing. The tower they raise does not scrape the sky in anger. It rises in yearning, a hunger for closeness, for ascent, for becoming more than dust and breath. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven." Genesis whispers. But heaven hears more than words. It hears intent. You float slowly past the rising bricks and you see it. Not defiance, but desire. These people are not warriors, they are architects of awe. They want to climb back to something they feel they've lost. Some scholars now speak of Eridu or Babylon, ancient ziggurats whose foundations match the Tower of Babel's tale. Excavations have uncovered step-like temples rising high from the plains, their mud bricks still crumbling under time's gentle hand. Each level, one closer to the divine. But the mystery doesn't lie in bricks, it lies in language. Linguists once puzzled over the sudden branching of tongues, how proto-languages spread like wildfire across continents with no clear origin. Some wonder, did something fracture the human voice? Was there a moment when unity unraveled, not in battle, but in bewilderment? You drift above them now as voices shift, eyes widen, tools fall. What once was a choir becomes a crowd. Confusion ripples like a breeze through the ranks of builders. Friends no longer understand friends. Parents call to children in tones unfamiliar. The Book of Jubilees suggests that God did not destroy the tower, but scattered the people gently, lest they perish in their pride. Others say the angels, led by Michael, walked among the builders, touching lips, sowing new words like seeds. You see them now, the workers lowering their stones, not in defeat, but in wonder. Some walk east, others west. Some laugh at strange sounds, others cry at the sudden loneliness of speech. But no one dies, no one burns. The tower is left behind, not toppled, but abandoned. A sacred monument to the limits of longing without guidance. And you, floating among the winds of scattered syllables, understand something quiet, that sometimes mercy looks like distance. That sometimes the most powerful answer to a prayer is to pause the reaching and whisper instead. The languages bloom across the land like wildflowers, and the sky, untouched, still watches. You drift now through a desert that has not yet known deliverance, where silence lies thick like dust, and the stars glimmer with ancient patience. This is the wilderness near Horeb, where a single bush will change the path of a history, not by what it says, but by what it does not destroy. There, near the edge of the sand's breadth, you see it. A flicker, a flame, but not like fire you've known. The bush burns, yet the branches remain. No crackling, no smoke, just light, a holy hush in flame form. It doesn't scream, it invites. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. Exodus 3 begins its sacred mystery. You float closer, drawn not by heat, but by presence. Moses stands barefoot, his sandals removed, not by command, but by instinct. The ground round him hums with a strange kind of gravity, the kind that makes silence feel like a voice. His eyes widen, his breath slows. The voice that speaks from the flame is not loud, yet it fills the sky. Some say this was no ordinary fire. Recent studies in the Sinai desert reveal gas emissions near acacia groves, where certain flammable gases rise during tectonic shifts. Could this explain the burning bush? Could science glimpse the frame of the miracle, without undoing its meaning? But those who sleep softly know better. The miracle wasn't the flame, it was the voice. I am that I am. No beginning, no end, just being. You watch Moses tremble, not in fear but in fullness. He doesn't step away. He leans in, because something in him remembers this fire, not from sight, from soul, from some echo seeded in the clay of Adam. The book of Jasher hints that the bush burned for 7 days before Moses approached, that others had passed it by, afraid or blind to wonder. Only Moses listened long enough to notice what didn't fade. You see him now, arms loose at his side, face turned toward the glow. The desert still stretches around him, but somehow the world has folded inward. Time slows. The sheep he was tending wander beyond the frame. Nothing else matters now but the call. And in that flame, God does not give orders. He gives presence. He gives name. Some say this moment was the first time divinity bent low enough to whisper into destiny, that the fire was a mirror, not of wrath, but of identity. That just as the bush burned without being consumed, so would Moses burn with burden, but never be destroyed. And you, hovering above the sand, feel it too. A warmth that doesn't scorch, a truth that doesn't crush. Science may trace flames to gas, but it cannot measure the moment a man meets his mission. The fire remains long after Moses leaves, because the fire was never outside him. It was always waiting. You drift now above a battlefield, not yet drenched in dust, where the spears glimmer beneath a sky that forgets to move. The world holds its breath, and time, the oldest of clocks, skips a beat. This is Gibeon. This is the day the sun forgot to set. Joshua stands tall, arm outstretched, voice rising not in pride but in partnership with the divine. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Ajalon. And the sky listens. You feel it, this break in the rhythm of the heavens. A stillness so wide, even the stars pause their whispering. The book of Joshua, chapter 10, remembers this moment, a miracle of woe and wonder. The sun does not move. The moon lingers in the east. Day stretches into what should have been night, and Israel finishes its battle in borrowed light. But what did they see, really? Ancient scrolls hint that the sun's delay was not of hours, but of perception, a cosmic lens bent for purpose. Some rabbinic traditions say angels held back the celestial bodies, not by force, but by honor. Others believe it was the moment time bowed to obedience. Modern scientists, curious and skeptical, have searched the sky's memory. Astronomers have run backward simulations of planetary movement and found peculiarities, tiny anomalies in Earth's rotation, ancient eclipse records that don't quite add up. While no universal consensus proves Joshua's miracle, they whisper of a strange disturbance, a mystery scratched into the orbit of time itself. Could tectonic shifts, refracted light, or solar halos have created the illusion? Some say yes. But what science can't measure is the moment when thousands looked up, and the heavens felt like a curtain being held back by an unseen hand. You hover above the frozen battlefield. The shadows beneath the soldiers' feet do not shift. The moon refuses to climb. Even the birds hold still in the air, suspended between now and what should come next. The Midrash says this pause wasn't just physical, it was moral. That God halted the day not for war but for justice, for mercy. That something had to be completed before the sun could move on. And perhaps that's why you feel a strange ache in the pause. Not just awe, but responsibility. The universe does not pause often. And when it does, it asks something in return. You see Joshua lower his hand. The people cheer. The day ends. The sun moves again, but slower, like a reluctant servant. And in that moment, you understand. It wasn't the sun that obeyed Joshua. It was creation, leaning toward covenant. Not every miracle needs to defy nature. Some miracles are when nature listens and chooses stillness. You drift now along the stone corridors of a royal chamber, where the breath of death hangs in the air like incense. King Hezekiah lies still on his bed, young, faithful, and marked for dying. The prophet Isaiah has already spoken. Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. But Hezekiah turns to the wall weeping, not with bitterness, but remembrance. O Lord, remember how I have walked before you in truth. And heaven listens. In the hush of that chamber, a new decision stirs. The scrolls are rewritten. The sentence is stayed. Isaiah returns, not with mourning, but with mercy. You shall live 15 more years. But Hezekiah, trembling, asks for a sign, and the sky again answers. The prophet tells him to look to the steps of Ahaz, the ancient sundial. Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps or back? Hezekiah dares to ask for the impossible. Let it go back. And so it does. The shadow retreats, not by illusion, not by trickery, but by command. You drift now above the courtyard where the sundial rests, stone cold and ancient. The shadow hesitates, then reverses, 10 full steps. Time, like a river, curls backward against its flow. Scripture records it in 2 Kings 20 and Isaiah 38. But outside the Bible, something strange appears too. Babylonian astronomical tablets, like the Mul Apin and Enuma Anu Enlil, hint at an ancient event where planetary paths appeared irregular. And in China, a mysterious eclipse-like occurrence is recorded around the same time. Some scientists speculate on atmospheric refraction, seismic disturbances, or even astronomical phenomena, such as retrograde planetary motion affecting visible timekeeping. But these explanations strain against the poetry of what really happened. This wasn't just about time reversing. This was about mercy overtaking finality. You move closer to Hezekiah's chamber. The king breathes again, steadier now. A fig poultice rests on his wound. His eyes open, not just to life, but to a different kind of time. One where the past can be revisited. One where God rewinds, not to erase, but to redeem. Mystics say this miracle wasn't merely physical, that the shadow's retreat symbolized a second chance, not just for Hezekiah, but for the people. A moment when divine mercy made time itself bow low in reverence. The Book of Jubilees calls time a servant of covenant, not a master. And in this moment, you believe it. You see the priests glance at the sundial, eyes wide. The people whisper of signs and wonders. But for Hezekiah, it's not spectacle that moves him. It's the whisper of breath he thought was lost. It's the slow turn of fate, drawn backward by grace. And as the shadow returns to its former place, you wonder, how many prayers have reversed a clock we didn't see? And how many mercies have we mistaken for coincidence? You drift now through the hush of desert wind, your steps barely brushing the dust of an ancient plain. The heat is silent, the sky holds its breath, and before you, it rises, Jericho. High walls thick with pride shimmer in the sun like a fortress of defiance. No battering ram, no army of engineers, only faith marches toward it. You hover above the Israelites now, arrayed in quiet formation. They say nothing, not a single war cry, only footsteps circling. Once each day for 6 days. Then, on the 7th, 7 times. And at last, the trumpet. A sound not sharp, not shrill, but holy. A vibration that feels like heaven holding its note in tension. And then, collapse. Not from fire, not from siege, but from obedience. Joshua 6 recounts the miracle. The walls of Jericho fell flat. No stones scattered outward in chaos. The city simply gave in, like a sigh after long resistance. You hover now through time, drifting forward thousands of years. Below you, a team of archaeologists from the early 20th century, Kathleen Kenyon and John Gustang, dig into the ruins of Tel es-Sultan, the site believed to be Jericho. And what do they find? A city laid waste, walls sunken inward, not outward, crumbling straight down, as though not shattered, but surrendered. Carbon dating and pottery fragments whisper an age-old riddle. The city fell fast, at the time the biblical Joshua would have marched. Skeptics point to discrepancies in dates. Others note Jericho's multiple layers of destruction. But many agree. One particular layer, burned, collapsed, sealed in ash, matches a sudden and mysterious downfall. Science cannot explain the song that cracked stone, but it records the silence that followed. Some mystics believe Jericho's fall was not merely a conquest, but a test, one final echo from the desert years. After all, no swords drew blood that day. No ladders scaled walls. Only trust moved forward. Only praise brought down strongholds. And perhaps that's the greater wonder, that the walls didn't fall to violence, but from worship. You drift lower now, into the heart of those fallen ruins. You see the remnants of homes, grain jars still full, untouched by scavengers. Why? Because Israel was told not to plunder but to pass through. This wasn't victory. It was obedience rewarded. And the earth remembers. Some say the sound that felled the city was not earthly at all, that the priests' trumpets carried frequencies beyond hearing, tones that disassembled pride itself. Others believe the Ark of the Covenant circling those walls shifted reality around it, that where God's presence moves, resistance dissolves. You walk now beside the fallen stones. Each one still speaks, of arrogance turned to dust, of trust walking silent circles, of faith that speaks louder than force. And as the last trumpet echo fades across time, you wonder, what walls have we built that crumble, not from attack, but from surrender? What pride waits to fall flat before something gentler than war? You drift now through early morning mist, where time feels tangled and the ore is thick with echoes. The landscape before you is not yet divided. The people are one voice, one ambition, one language, and their feet carry them east toward a dream of height. They arrive on the plains of Shinar, and there, stone by stone, they begin. The Tower of Babel. Not a ladder to heaven, not truly, but a monument to certainty. To reach upward, yes, but also to prove something, that man could make a name for himself. Genesis 11 tells it plainly. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. But the truth under the stone is more subtle. It's not the height that offends the divine. It's the motive, the forgetting. The forgetting that we are not the source of our breath. You float higher, past scaffolds of pride. The tower grows, but the unity begins to fray. Not from rebellion, not from sabotage, but from the unseen turning of tongues. One word becomes many. One voice becomes confusion. And so, the tower crumbles, not with fire, not with thunder, but with misunderstanding. A holy disruption, a cosmic pause. language itself fractures, and with it, the world becomes beautifully complex, wildly diverse, painfully unrepeatable. But what if that tower was more than metaphor? Archaeologists have long pointed to the Etemenanki ziggurat, a massive stepped temple in Babylon dedicated to Marduk, as the likely inspiration. Towering nearly 300 feet, built of mud brick, inscribed with royal declarations, it stood for centuries and possibly reached its final form under Nebuchadnezzar. And on a clay tablet, now housed in the Shoyan collection, an ancient blueprint of the tower appears. The ziggurat, drawn with a 7-tiered design, crowned by the words Tower of Babel. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when ancient texts whisper the same myth in different tongues, from Sumerian to Akkadian, Hebrew to Greek, it's not just legend echoing, it's memory resurfacing. Some scholars say the Babel event explains not just languages, but cultures, the spread of tribes, the sudden fracturing of early civilizations. Others argue it was a divine mercy, not punishment, but protection. Because when all power concentrates in one voice, the soul forgets how to listen. You drift now over ancient foundations, weathered by wind and time. The ruins of Babylon murmur stories of a tower once meant to pierce heaven, and how heaven answered not with wrath, but with distance. Some mystics believe the languages were not scattered randomly, that each tongue carried a shard of the original light, a prism of meaning, fractured into poetry, rhythm, and symbol. And that one day, perhaps in Eden restored, those tongues will return to harmony. Not to one language, but one understanding. The story of Babel is not just the fall of a building, it's the beginning of listening, of translation, of seeking one another not in sameness, but in sacred difference. And tonight, as you float over the cradle of language, you can almost hear it. The hum of many voices, stitched by silence, all telling one old story in different ways. You drift now toward a plain, long buried in silence, where the sun once rose over 2 cities, known not for their height, but for their heat, Sodom and Gomorrah. The names carry weight, not because of their wickedness alone, but because of what followed. The book of Genesis describes it with trembling clarity. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the heavens. You've heard this story before, cities undone by divine judgment. But tonight, you float above the soil, and the soil remembers differently. It remembers heat so sudden, so total, that it turns stone into ash and sand into glass. Near the Dead Sea's northern edge, an ancient site known as Tal el-Hammam may hold the memory. Excavated by teams of archaeologists and researchers, it bears the scars of something unnatural. Radiated pottery shards, flash melted. Mud brick walls scorched beyond recognition. A layer of destruction 15 feet thick, dated to around 1700 BCE. And strangest of all, high concentrations of shocked quartz, minerals only formed under intense pressure and heat, similar to a nuclear detonation or cosmic impact. So what happened here? Some scientists propose a rare cosmic event, an airburst, like the Tunguska explosion in 1908. A meteor fragment entering the atmosphere, detonating above the city with a force greater than modern bombs. But ancient texts saw more than fire. They saw memory burned into the land. The Book of Jubilees speaks not just of sin, but of angels turning away, of unnatural unions, of cries reaching the sky. And the Quran echoes it too. We turned them upside down and rained down upon them stones of baked clay. Stones not of war, but of purification. You float now over the desolate plain where no birds sing, where salt crusts over the memories. Some call it the cursed land. But it is not cursed. It is remembered. Some rabbis say Lot's wife did not turn to salt out of disobedience, but because memory has weight. Because looking back when something sacred ends can anchor you forever in sorrow. Others say she became a monument, not to fear, but to what must be left behind when grace departs. And still others believe Sodom burned not only from above, but from within. That when love forgets how to serve, fire finds a way in. You drift lower. The wind carries with it the taste of ash, not sharp, not bitter, just old. The kind of old that remembers names long forgotten. Sodom is not just a warning, it is a mirror. It asks not just what was destroyed, but what was once beautiful. A city before the smoke. A people before the cry. The flames did not erase the memory. They sealed it. And now, science peers into the earth and finds what Scripture wrote long ago, that something fell from the sky and left nothing untouched. But this too is not the end. Because from the dust, Lot's daughters carried forward a broken seed. Because even in judgment, the story bends toward restoration. The fire came, but so did the dawn. And as you drift above the land, once lost to light, you feel it, that the heat of Sodom was not merely wrath, but remembrance. You drift now through the echo of waves, not violent, not roaring, but deep, slow, like a memory stirred by silence. The waters rise before you, not with wrath, but with reverence, and beneath them, the story of Noah waits to be heard once more. You've heard the tale. A man, a boat, a flood, animals in pairs, rain that fell for 40 days and 40 nights. But beneath the nursery rhyme simplicity lies something ancient, elemental, and strangely scientific. Let's begin again. The book of Genesis speaks of a world corrupted. Every thought of man's heart only evil continually. And so, a decision to cleanse, to start anew. But how? With water. Not just rain from above, but springs from the deep. The fountains of the great deep burst forth, it says, and modern geology nods. In the 1990s, researchers discovered massive underground reservoirs beneath the Earth's crust, water locked away in rock, deep in the mantle. Some believe there may be 3 times more water underground than in all our oceans combined. Could such fountains have burst forth? Could tectonic shifts, volcanic activity, or asteroid strikes have shaken the earth and sky together in a deluge that reshaped the planet? Ancient flood myths from nearly every culture say yes. The Epic of Gilgamesh, older than Genesis, speaks of a man warned by a god, building a great boat, surviving a world drowned. The Quran describes the ark resting on Mount Judy, not Ararat, as waves like mountains swept the earth. And in 2014, sediment cores taken from the Black Sea revealed a rapid influx of salt water from the Mediterranean. A flooding event, perhaps sudden, perhaps catastrophic, that submerged ancient civilizations. You hover now above Ararat, or Judy, or somewhere sacred between, and you see not just an ark, but a vessel of memory. Some say Noah's ark was more metaphor than map, that the true ark was a covenant, a moment when God preserved not just animals, but the possibility of goodness. Others believe the ark still lies buried, fossilized in the folds of remote mountains, waiting for eyes pure enough to see. And some whisper of the Book of Enoch, of watchers who saw the corruption and wept, of angels who warned, of a flood not sent in rage, but in sorrow, Because even the rain, some say, wept. Noah was not chosen because he was perfect, but because he remembered. And as the ark rocked on the deep, above waters that covered the bones of Eden and the voices of the Nephilim, Noah waited, not in fear, but in faith. The dove, the olive branch, they were not signs of escape, they were signs of return. And when the ark settled and the door opened, the air carried with it something new, not purity, but possibility. You float now just above the waves, and they speak, not in thunder, but in hushes. They whisper of what they once held, temples, towers, secrets, stars. Some say the flood wiped the slate clean, but the earth never forgets, and neither do you. Because somewhere deep in the marrow of your spirit, you remember water. You remember being held in darkness. You remember being born from deep things. The flood came, but so did the rainbow. And tonight, it arcs above you, not in color, but in calm. A soft covenant drawn not with fire, but with light. You drift now across a desolate plain where the wind carries the silence of cities lost to flame. The land is still, hollowed, ashen, but it hums with memory. This is where Sodom and Gomorrah once stood, cities whose names have become symbols not only of sin, but of mystery, judgment, and ancient flame. The story, as told in Genesis, is stark. 2 cities consumed, not by war, not by plague, but by fire falling from heaven. Brimstone and fire from the Lord. Lot flees. His wife looks back. She turns to salt, and the land is changed forever. But beneath the poetry, science watches quietly. In the southern basin of the Dead Sea, near the ruins of Tol El Hammam and Bab Edra, archaeologists have found what they believe are the remnants of once thriving Bronze Age settlements. Abruptly destroyed, their walls blackened and vitrified, their people vanished. And in 2021, a research team released a startling hypothesis that a massive airburst, a meteor exploding in the atmosphere, may have annihilated the city, now buried at Tol El Hammam. They found high concentrations of shocked quartz, crystals fractured by intense pressure, often found only at nuclear sites or meteor craters. They found pottery melted into glass, bricks fused together by heat over 2000 degrees Celsius, bones fragmented in an instant, buildings blown outward. A cosmic event, a fire from above, a judgment if not divine, then certainly devastating. Some say the timing aligns with the biblical timeline. Others argue for caution, that science must not stretch to serve myth. But others still whisper, what if both are true? What if Genesis preserved the memory and geology revealed its method? And what of Lot's wife? Salt pillars do rise along the Dead Sea, wind-carved and strange. Was she turned to salt, or lost in the salt-choked winds that followed the blast? Some say her story is warning, others say it is longing, the pain of looking back. The Book of Wisdom, a late addition to Scripture, says of Sodom, the region still bears witness, a monument to an unbelieving soul. But even Sodom is not only ruin. There is always a remnant. Lot, alone in a cave, the smoke rising behind him. And the fire even now may flicker far beneath the salt, not to destroy, but to remind. Because judgment in the Bible is rarely final. It is a clearing, a letting go. And in the hush that follows the ash, new things grow. You hover above the Dead Sea now. It gleams like liquid glass, still, heavy. It reflects the stars without ripple. Beneath it lie layers of ancient sediment, crushed time, and deeper still, memory. Some say the fire that fell was punishment, others say it was purification. and some say it was a mercy, because sometimes the earth remembers what we forget, and sometimes the sky burns, not in rage, but in grief. Tonight, you drift upward, higher and higher, until the horizon curves beneath you and the clouds part to reveal something strange, something half-built, half-broken, a tower, rising toward the stars, unfinished, forgotten, still whispering through time. This is Babel. The book of Genesis tells us, and they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens." And so they did. A great ziggurat of ambition, unity, and singular speech. But then the story breaks. God descends, confuses their language, scatters them across the earth. A divine intervention that changes not only history, but communication itself. But was it just a parable? Or was it rooted in something real? Archaeologists have long suspected that the biblical Tower of Babel may have a counterpart in the ancient city of Babylon, specifically the massive temple tower known as Etemenanki. Dedicated to Marduk, its name means Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. It once stood nearly 300 feet tall, built in massive tiers of mud brick, an architectural wonder in the 6th century BCE, but older structures likely existed before it, enough to inspire legends passed down through oral memory, growing taller with each retelling. What's remarkable is not just the ruins, but the linguistic record. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia, Akkadian, Sumerian, Elamite, all coexist, all diverge. Linguistic shifts appear like fractures in the stone, a scattering not just of people, but of syllables. And then comes the science. Modern linguistics traces nearly all languages in Europe and parts of Asia back to a single mother tongue, Proto-Indo-European, spoken perhaps 6,000 years ago. But before that, there were others, lost entirely, fragmented beyond reconstruction. What remains are only roots and echoes. What caused these divides? Geography? Migration? Or something sudden? Some scholars say the story of Babel preserves a psychological truth, the trauma of fragmentation. A time when unity was lost not by violence, but by confusion. And the ache of that loss lives on in every mistranslation, every language barrier, every longing to be understood. The Book of Jubilees offers another version. It says, "The tower was built over 43 years and rose 5,433 cubits before God cast a great wind against it, toppling it in ruin." You drift down now into the dust of broken bricks, the wind weaving through what's left. You see the patterns of ancient architects, lines scratched into clay, languages birthed not in joy, but in scattering. Some say the fall of Babel was a punishment for pride. Others say it was the beginning of culture, of diversity, poetry, rhythm, nuance. And still others wonder, was it a mercy? Because language, though divided, became rich. And in every language, one word has remained sacred: light. In Hebrew, or. In Greek, phos. In Latin, lux. In Aramaic, nehura. The tongue may fracture, but light still speaks. And as you float above the broken tower, you realize it was not destroyed, only unfinished. And in its ruins, we began to listen. You drift now across dunes glowing under moonlight, the silence of desert stretching beyond comprehension. This is not just any wilderness. This is the great expanse where freedom walked barefoot and a nation was born beneath fire and cloud. The Exodus, one of the most sweeping tales in the Bible. A people enslaved, a prophet called, a sea split, a wilderness wandered. Skeptics once called it pure myth. Yet modern tools have started to whisper differently. Satellite imaging has revealed ancient caravan trails, paths of migration etched into the Sinai Peninsula, barely visible to the eye but unmistakable from above. These routes, some straight, others winding, follow patterns that seem too purposeful for randomness. They match the possible journey of people who moved in haste, avoiding fortified cities, circling wilderness, resting by rare water. You drift lower toward one such path, a ribbon of stone pressed down by 1,000 feet long gone. The stars above echo the same routes followed by fire and cloud. In the Book of Exodus, we are told that Moses led the people toward the Yam Suf, translated often as the Red Sea, though scholars debate the true location. Could it have been a marsh, a narrow gulf, or perhaps the Gulf of Aqaba, deep and blue and treacherous? Now, under those waters, sonar scans have revealed curious shapes, stone structures, coral formations, suggestive of chariots or axles, submerged for millennia. Though controversial, these finds stir the imagination. Could something sacred have passed here once? And then there is the Apua Papyrus, an Egyptian text housed in the Dutch National Museum. It speaks of chaos, of the Nile turned to blood, of darkness, of slaves fleeing. Its language mirrors the plagues. Its timeline is uncertain, but its tone is uncanny. Some say it's coincidence, others say it's cultural echo. You pass over Mount Sinai now, not the tourist peak, but the wider wilderness. Some believe the real Sinai lies across the Gulf, in ancient Midian, where Moses fled and first heard the voice in the burning bush. Archaeologists have found inscriptions of Yahweh, worship not in Egypt, but carved into rocks in the Sinai and Negev deserts, suggesting a people once moved through here, singing the name. The pillar of cloud still seems to drift before you, faint and glowing. And the fire? It hums in the stones, an ember memory. Some say the Exodus is legend woven from many smaller truths, drought migrations, revolts, forgotten kings. Others say it was a miracle too vast for history to hold. But here in the night, among the dunes and the dust, it doesn't feel like myth. It feels like footsteps. It feels like a people on the edge of something new. And you, drifting through the hush of holy sand, feel it too. The leaving, the longing, the liberation. You drift over a dry plain in the still heat of Canaan, where dust dances like memory and silence settles upon the ruins of a once great city. Beneath you rise the ancient stones of Jericho, low, broken, weathered with time, but they whisper. Oh, they whisper. Because here, the Bible tells us, something impossible once happened. Walls fell, not to siege engines, but to sound, to faith, to a march and a shout. Joshua 6:20 describes the moment vividly. The people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. No battering rams, no ladders, just obedience, patience, and sacred noise. You hover above the remains. Ancient trenches carved by archaeologists now expose layers upon layers, cities built atop cities. This is Tel es Sultan, one of the oldest inhabited settlements on Earth. And in one of those layers, archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon discovered something strange. A wall, not toppled inward as from invasion, but outward as if pushed from within. The destruction was sudden, fiery, and intense. Charred grains were found buried in the ash. Why would a city under siege hold so much untouched grain? Some say it was a short siege, exactly as the Bible claims. 7 days, no time for starvation. Others argue the dating is off. that Kenyon placed the collapse centuries too early or too late. But more recent scholars, like Bryant Wood, believe the earlier conclusions were flawed and that the fallen walls match the biblical timeline after all. You pass beside one of these fallen walls now, its stones sunken into the soil, resting like broken ribs of a forgotten giant. And still they speak. Could sound have played a role? Modern studies into acoustics suggest that harmonic resonance, if strong enough, can break glass, rattle steel, unsettle structures. Perhaps the shofar's ancient blast stirred more than hearts. Perhaps it shook foundations. Or perhaps it wasn't the sound itself, but what it represented: obedience to a divine rhythm. A people who believed that walking in silence, encircling a city with faith, was enough. Some say Jericho fell because of seismic tremors. The region sits along a fault line. Could divine timing have met natural shaking? Others say it was a parable, a sacred metaphor of walls we all must face, and how faith brings them down. But tonight, in this quiet field, it feels more than metaphor. The stones don't lie. They lie fallen. The wind still circles the mound as if replaying the seventh day's march. You feel the echo of feet, the blast of horns, the cry of a people who believed. You drift above the center now, where once stood a city proud and high. Its walls are dust, its gates are gone, but the story remains. You carry it with you across the plains of time. Because sometimes faith leaves ruins, and sometimes ruins leave faith. You drift now across a barren plain near the Dead Sea, where the earth looks scorched, salted, and strangely still. Beneath your spirit, the land crackles with old heat. Heat not from the sun, but from something ancient. Something that fell. Something that burned. Genesis 19 speaks of it. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, consumed by fire and brimstone out of the heavens. Cities of warning, of wrath, of judgment. And for centuries, many believed the story was myth, until the ground began to speak. You descend toward a site called Tal el Hammam in modern-day Jordan. Here, among the ruins of a Bronze Age city, archaeologists have uncovered what they describe as sudden destruction, instantaneous, intense, and strange. Bricks melted, pots turned into glass, a layer of ash charred and laced with sulfur. Even the skeletons unearthed here tell of trauma. Limbs torn, skulls shattered, not by weapons, but by explosive force, and scattered everywhere. Tiny spheroids of melted sand, a known signature of the high heat impacts. Some researchers now believe the city was leveled by an airburst, similar to the Tunguska event in 1908 when a meteor exploded above Siberia, flattening 80 million trees in seconds. Could a similar cosmic fireball have erased Sodom? The researchers from the Tal el Hammam excavation think so. They estimate the event released more energy than Hiroshima, baking the city to the bone in a single flash. Their studies speak of a firestorm hot enough to vaporize stone. You drift through that ancient street now, where buildings once stood and voices once rose in the warmth of day. All is silent. All is ash. Lot's wife turned to salt? Some believe the region's natural minerals hardened over her in that moment of turning back. Others say her story is symbolic, that no one can move forward while longing for the burning past. And the sulfur? Even today, nodules of pure brimstone, almost 98% pure, dot the landscape around the Dead Sea. They're not common, not natural, not in this form. Some say divine fire fell. Others say a space rock did the work. But tonight, as you float over scorched stone and forgotten thresholds, one truth feels eternal. Something happened here, something final, something preserved in heat and silence. The prophet spoke of Sodom not to recount destruction, but to warn of hearts grown cold, of hospitality lost, of arrogance exalted, of forgetting the sacred in the everyday. But even in judgment, there is mercy. Lot was spared, a remnant preserved. Because in every fire, there is a flicker of hope, of rebuilding, of remembering, of choosing again. You rise now above the ancient valley, where cities once shimmered and laughter once echoed. No sound remains, only ash, only wind, only memory. And yet, from this silence, you carry the story. Not just of fire, but of warning. Not just of judgment, but of the holy chance to turn before the sky darkens. You ascend slowly. The fires below dim in the distance, and a hush settles across your soul. Because now, the scroll has closed. The spiral has returned to stillness. The 7 stories of flame and fact, of sacred truth and scientific echo, have been laid before you. You have drifted through time and text, through mystery and matter, and now it is time to rest. Wind down. Let your breath soften now, like dust settling on an ancient floor. Let your thoughts float like starlight over old seas. You've walked beside giants, angels, and prophets. You've stood beneath floods and fire, beside ruins and rivers. And through it all, something holy lingered. The Bible whispers not just in faith, but in fossil, in ash, in stars. And science, it doesn't steal the story, it illuminates it. The scroll is sealed again tonight, not with finality, but with reverence. So sleep now. Beneath a sky still whispering the stories of old, you are remembered. You are part of the echo. The stars have dimmed, but something sacred watches still.